Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. I have got 9 books to tell you about today, and some of you might know that I collect Tim Hortons references in the books that I read, and 3 of the books today have got Tim Hortons references. What I do is collect passages on my blog online, so I will link that down below in the description. I think I'm past 125 books now. Just in 2025 alone, I'm already at 4 more. So if you're interested, you can go have a look. I am an eclectic reader, so in this mix of books that I've got for you today, there's contemporary realism, there's speculative fiction, I've got a trans coming out memoir, I've got nature writing, there's a picture book by an Indigenous author, I've got a middle grade novel that's like for really the younger end of middle grade readers. And 5 out of these 9 are in audio format. So if you're big on audiobooks, this episode is for you. But before I get to the books, I want to mention a project that I worked on in the last week, which is a patchwork tablecloth. You can see it behind me here. A couple weeks ago, a friend gave me a little stack of quilting cottons, and I decided to make things out of them, mostly for my mental health. Creativity supports our well-being, and you can actually look for research on this that's outlined in the book Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. But when I was doing all of the cutting out of the fabric pieces, I was leaning over my table too much and I hurt my back. And so that's why I'm doing this video standing up. I'm finding it's, too much sitting. I can't do it with my back the way that it is now. So that's why you see a different background today. All right, on to the books. Starting with this short story that's in kind of like a chapbook format, Winter or A Town Near Palgrave by André Alexis. This was published by Coach House as a fundraiser for Independent Bookstore Day, which is going to be happening in April. More about that in future episodes. I bought this in 2022 and it sat on my shelf unread until Sean of Sean Breathes Books talked about it on his channel recently. So I will link his video down below. It was his Black History Month vlog. And so I am going to count this for my Black History Month as well. Maybe I'll do a little wrap up of that after I finish telling you about this story and about André Alexis. He was born in Trinidad and as a child moved to Canada. I think he lives in Ontario now. He's published a whole bunch of novels, which I recommend. Probably his most well-known is 15 Dogs. He's won the Writers' Trust, the Giller Prize, and the Wyndham Campbell Prize for body of work. So, very impressive writer. His work is philosophical with a dry sense of humor. It's like he's got a twinkle in his eye. His prose is always very clear, and yet it's also linguistically playful. And this story is a total delight. So to wrap up my Black History Month reads, or 6 books, counting this one. Next is a book I listened to in audio format. I Heard Her Call My Name, a Memoir of Transition by Lucy Sante. She was born in Belgium and grew up in the US. The audiobook is read by the author, who was assigned male at birth and then went through her gender transition when she was 66 years old. There are 2 timelines in her telling of her story. So starting with her childhood in the 1960s, and then the other timeline is from when her egg was cracked, that's the terminology, and coming out to friends and family and how she went about that. There are so many references to popular culture that really helped ground me in the times that she was talking about. So for example, 1982, she was obsessed with the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five and their song The Message, and I was too. Lucy also talked about discovering Allen Ginsberg's Howl when she was in 7th grade, writing, "At around the same time, religion fell off me with the sudden mass speed of snow off a tin roof. My piety had reached fever pitch just the previous year, when I went so far as to attend services before school on First Friday and considered making it a daily practice." So the author's voice in this memoir is also interesting. She talks about why she chose not to hire a vocal coach, and also the issues surrounding having her vocal cords shaved and why she hasn't done that. Just listening to her voice is a good reminder that women can have low voices. And the whole memoir is about finding happiness through confronting the truth. It's really well done. Next up, something entirely different, Bad Badger by Maryrose Wood. And she is an American writer. The audiobook is read by Chris Devon, and the print edition has gorgeous illustrations by the Italian artist Giulia Gigini. I'll pop some of these photos in here so you can see. This is a middle grade novel for readers about age 7 to 10. And it's a lot like Skunk and Badger by Amy Timberlake, if you're familiar with that. And it's very much a story of friendship. So in this case, the friendship between a badger and a gull. The writing is so charming. The badger's name is Septimus, and here's a quote. "Septimus had always been interested in many things, in omelets and opera, seashells and kayaks, the true nature of badgerdom, and more." So poor Septimus keeps thinking that he is a bad badger. He lives all alone. There's no other badgers around, and he has spots on his face instead of stripes. And he's thinking, am I really a badger? And then there's also the friendship that I mentioned with Gully, and the mistakes that Badger makes by making assumptions, by not realizing, for example, that it's difficult for a gull to drink tea out of a teacup. And the examples in this book of how to apologize when you make mistakes, how to be a true friend, how to admit mistakes. It's just perfect, really, really good. And certainly has lessons for adults, I think. So this would be a good parent-child read aloud, or in the case of the audiobook, you could listen to it in the car. You could talk about cheese. So Septimus and Gully are going to go on a picnic. So first they go to a market. It didn't take long to find the things they needed. A bunch of grapes, a round of crisp focaccia bread studded with olives and tiny red tomatoes, a wedge of cheese that smelled both good and bad. That's what all the best cheeses have, Septimus explained. A complex aroma, one that defies easy categorization. The taste is bound to be sublime. What a great way to introduce children to adventurous types of cheese. So, from Bad Badger to Bad Land. That's the title of the next book. Bad Land is by Corinna Chong. I listened to the audiobook read by Tara Koehler. Corinna Chong is a Chinese Canadian, and she has a German grandmother. This comes up in the novel, which is set in Drumheller, mostly in about 2016. Drumheller is a small town in Alberta that is set in the distinctive landscape called the Badlands. There are hoodoos there. The canyons, the hills have got these very distinctive stripes. There's lots of dinosaur fossils and bones that have been found, and there's a dinosaur museum there. The woman who's the central character, Regina, she and her brother Ricky were raised by a single parent, their mother, who they call Mutti, who has come from Germany. Regina was born there, but grew up in Drumheller, and she is still living in that same house. I think she's in her 30s by the time of 2016. And her brother, who's been estranged, she hasn't seen him for 7 years, shows up with his 6-year-old daughter. And we know that something has happened, and we also learn about the difficult mother-daughter relationship. Mutti isn't around. There's a question of where she went. And all of this is what's revealed in the novel. So there's a certain amount of tension regarding that. It's quite moody and atmospheric. Regina is a very large woman, and that's also an issue of self-image and how other people see her. And there's something going on with her niece, Jez. But the two of them, aunt and niece, bond. And there's a road trip. There's all kinds of things happening that are a bit, well, more than a bit dark. There's violence in here. The sense of how our child selves are still there under our adult selves is teased out very well. And the weirdness of living in a town that has these giant replica dinosaurs everywhere, pretty kitschy, but not particularly prosperous. There's boarded up stores in Main Street, that kind of thing. Regina's trying to get healthy, and so she's been going for walks. She says, one house had a Santa-hatted T-Rex figurine on the roof with a long tube of yellow lights dangling from his crotch down into the snow. The owners kept him up for nearly half the year, from November to March. I used him as a landmark. Make it to the pissing T-Rex, I used to say to myself. I really enjoyed this. Next up is another Canadian book. This one is a graphic novel, Minor Arcana, and it's by Jeff Lemire. Now, I only read the first issue. It was first published in September of 2024, and I found it in Hoopla, my library's database. And in Hoopla, they have issue 1, 3, and 5. Issue 5 just came out in January this year. So even though I really liked it, I'm going to wait until there's a trade publication with the first, I think, 6 issues is what the plan is, and get the whole story. Jeff Lemire has written multiple graphic novels. Probably his most famous is Essex County, which I highly recommend. So what's got me hooked is the scenario in Minor Arcana, which is that there's this young queer woman who has reluctantly returned to her small hometown because her mother is ill and needs somebody. And her mother's work is as a psychic. So there is a supernatural element in this storyline. Next, I'm going on to England and True Things. I listened to the audiobook Wilding by Isabella Tree, and it's read by the author. So she and her husband converted unprofitable farmland to a nature preserve, and all of the ins and outs of how they went about that is described in this, or sort of in a memoir aspect. But there's also a lot of details about nature. I just found it a balm for my soul. It didn't go exactly smoothly all the time, so that neighbors, for example, complained for various reasons. Some thought that it was criminal to let agricultural land go fallow. Some thought, okay, nature is fine and all that, but it doesn't belong here in the southeast of England. They were accused of destroying the character of the countryside. Other people said this is turning into quite a mess. People said it looked abandoned, and there's a whole bunch about ragweed, which I found all of that really interesting, because in my garden in Edmonton, I also faced complaints from some people who didn't like the aesthetics of having a wild looking garden in an urban environment. That topic is covered in a book I talked about recently, Urban Jungle by Ben Wilson. But aesthetics, yeah, they're so deeply subjective. And I was interested to learn that there are 18th century paintings that include dead trees in the landscape. And Queen Charlotte, who was the wife of George III, had imported standing dead trees to the garden at Kew to give it a sense of age and continuity. So ragweed is a native plant in England, and apparently there's a lot of hatred about it. That whole thing was really interesting too. Probably corresponds to the strong feelings about dandelions here in Canada. I'm not sure. But that chapter opened with a short poem, and I guessed the author right away as being John Clare, and I was correct, because in Olivia Lang's book, The Garden Against Time, she talked quite a bit about John Clare and his nature poetry. John Clare's poetry comes up in Oaklore as well, which I noticed in Storygraph. The covers of these two books are so similar to each other. more about Oaklore in a minute. But back to attitudes about native and non-native species. Rabbits introduced by the Normans are often considered a pest. Brown hares introduced by the Romans have their own UK biodiversity action plan. She does talk about reintroducing beavers to the wild in the UK. And I remember back in 2001 when Laurie and I went to Findhorn, we went to the pub one night. So this is in the north of Scotland. And then when the people at the pub, some of these guys there, heard that we were from Canada, they started talking about the introduction of beavers. And in Isabella's book, that is the time period that she's talking about with this introduction. So just kind of fun to remember that. She talks about the green woodpeckers and their yaffling sound, which is also talked about in Oaklore. She gets into the sex lives of butterflies, the purple emperor. There's quite a bit about this particular butterfly that makes the largest butterfly migration on Earth, a round trip that can stretch 15,000 kilometers from Africa to the Arctic Circle, which is almost twice as long as the monarch butterfly migrations. They have various kinds of grazing animals on this piece of land that they're talking about, including Tamworth pigs. My sister Simone raises Tamworths, so I could picture them exactly. She talked about how the pigs rootling around makes the perfect kind of environment for a type of willow to root. And this sallow, this kind of willow, is what the purple emperor relies on as its main food source. So all of the complex interactions are still being figured out, and the science and the studying of all what's happening on this piece of land was also really interesting to me. Oh yeah, she also quotes Elaine Ingham, who's a leading soil microbiologist, and back in around the early 2000s, I attended a 3-day workshop with Elaine Ingham in Edmonton, and I learned so much about soil. I can get really excited about soil microbiology, and I remember when I was back at work at the library and I was talking about this workshop that I'd been at, there was some bafflement by some of my colleagues about why I would want to have even attended such a workshop. And I thought, isn't everybody excited about the wonders of soil? Apparently not. If you are in the soil microbiology excitement camp, please let me know in the comments, all right? Just so much fascinating information in here, including about oaks and how they grow best in an open area. And so the idea that a closed canopy forest is the kind of landscape that Britain had years ago is belied by the fact that there's these huge ancient oaks, and they don't grow that way unless they've got open space. They don't even take root unless they've got lots of sunlight. So our ideas about what landscape looked like is also shifting. So a whole book about oak trees. So there are 2 native oak species in the UK. There are other oaks around the world, and lots of stories and ties to ecology and folklore and religion, just human interactions with the oak tree are collected in here in a very engaging, a bit rambling, going off into tangents about birds and insects and fungi and that sort of thing. Lots of the kind of trivia facts that are like catnip. You just want to say, oh, did you know this? Did you know that? So for example, oaks in the UK provide food, shelter, housing, and support for an astonishing 2,300 other plants, animals, and fungi. And because the Trans Day of Visibility is coming up at the end of March, I'm going to read a little section to give you a flavor of Jules Acton's prose. Oaks are often described as kings, but they can just as easily be queens. One of the many things I learned on my oak journey is that oak trees are arguably both male and female. They certainly have both male and female flowers. The male flowers dangle down in slender yellow-green catkins. The female flowers are tiny, red or brownish, and bud-like, exquisite if you look carefully. What would the oak say about its own gender? We don't know, of course. However, I like to think that could you ask a big, brawny oak about this topic, it would roar a thundering, throaty laugh, the kind of laugh that would rumble all around you and under your feet and ripple through your belly, and then ask you a question in return. What is it with you humans and your gender fixations? I am an oak. I am what I am. The long lists for the Women's Prize for Fiction and the Women's Prize for Nonfiction have both been announced. And I'm actually not that interested in the fiction list, although that might change when I hear other people talking about it. The only book I've read on that list is The Safekeep. But the nonfiction list has really captured my interest. The only book I had read on that list when it came out is Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller, and I do recommend it. I'm interested in reading Raising Hare by Claire Dalton, and that one is going to be a good one for People April. I don't know if they've decided which book they're going to have for the group read yet, but I voted for that one. People April is a readathon where the hosts are encouraging us to read biography and memoir books about people. I will link to Elizabeth and Roz and Brian's channels down below if you want to know more about People April. Helen Scales has a book on the list, What the Wild Sea Can Be, and I read her The Brilliant Abyss and loved it, so I definitely want to read her new one. And Jenny Fagan, her book Outland is on there. I've only read novels by her in the past and loved them, so very much want to read Outland when it comes out in North America. But the long list is the reason why I picked up this next book, Private Revolutions, and in North America the subtitle is 4 Women Face China's New Social Order. In the UK, it's Coming of Age in a New China. Yuan Yang is a Chinese author based in the UK, and she interviewed 4 women about what life is like for them, and I was just fascinated. This is so interesting. I'm always wanting to hear stories of women whose lives are different from mine, and these certainly are. The situation of childcare. So in China, many workers have had to leave their villages or rural areas to work in the big city, and their children end up being raised by grandparents, or in some cases left to look after themselves, even if they're only young teens. They have some statistics here. In the early 2010s, over 60 million Chinese children, 1 in 5, lived without their parents. 1 in 14 lived alone. So, like, if the grandparents had to go out to work, or their parents, children, even really young ones, ended up being locked up in their homes so that they would stay safe, though, of course, tragedies happen when adult supervision isn't there. And then there's this whole thing about the hukou system that I wasn't familiar with. So for one of these women, it was her struggle to have her daughter, who was born illegally in the city, to be able to attend school in the city, because she wanted to keep her daughter with her instead of sending her back to the village, because that had been her own experience and it wasn't a positive one. So this daughter should have been born and registered in a village, and then she wouldn't be able to attend a city school. But also children who are born outside of marriage or outside of a parent's birth quota, those numbers are staggering as well. She says by the mid-2010s, government figures suggested there were 13 million people without any kind of hukou. Although by law these children were technically allowed to register for hukou without barriers, in practice, local authorities routinely charged high fees or gated access to services for such children. And so mothers were charged what they call a social maintenance fee for children who are born outside of a birth quota. And it was really expensive. One of the women in here, Siyue, she gave birth in a private hospital because public hospitals wouldn't deliver children born outside marriage. And she had to pay a 10,000 renminbi fine as well. The whole education system, we saw it from different angles, from the viewpoint of these different women. And one thing is the private tutoring industry. In 2021, it was worth $120 billion, and it collapsed within a few days because there was this new government law was banning for-profit tutoring in the core academic subjects for children. Around 10 million people lost their jobs just as a result of that. On so many levels, this book is very eye-opening, and thought it was great. Next up is this picture book, Aloha Everything. It's by Kaylin Milia George, who is a native Hawaiian, and the illustrations are by May Waite, who's a Chinese American who grew up in Hawaii. This is such a joyful, exuberant celebration of all things Hawaiian, the ecology, the history, the culture. I picked it up because it won the American Library Association Media Award for Asian Pacific American picture book. It's got this glorious art, so pretty. It's done with mixed media, gouache, and there's also gold leaf added. A girl discovering more about her heritage, and you can even tell just the way she's running on the cover here that the energy, the liveliness of this story. There are also 25 Hawaiian words in here, so there's a vocabulary aspect. And I learned that it was funded through Kickstarter. It's the author's debut, and it's fabulous. And the last book that I've got to tell you about is a Canadian novel, Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club by Megan Gail Coles. The audiobook is read by the author, and this was in the best 67 Canadian books of the 21st century, a project that I did with Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girls. I didn't get to it till now, and I'm so glad that I did. This was a debut for the author who grew up outside the main city area of Newfoundland, which is St. John's, and she's written a whole bunch of other plays, short stories, poetry. This novel is set during a blizzard on Valentine's Day in St. John's. There are a number of characters that we go in and out of their heads, things that they're thinking. The Newfoundland dialect is very prominent, and social differences between people who are townies, born in the city, grew up in the city, to the bay men and bay girls. It's also quite evident that two central characters are young women. Bad things have happened to them and are happening. Rage is building, pressure is building, and in the audio version, I found it very full on. There are difficult topics, and yet it's a can't look away kind of situation too. There's a train wreck. There's a train wreck coming down the line, and the humor is also something that kept me engaged with this. The voice, I love distinctive voice, and you definitely get that in this novel. And expressions like a bad idea dressed up as a good one. The word Jesus used so often as an epithet. So here's an example. There's Amanda and her brother Cal. And here's Amanda. She hopes Donna gives him the back of her Jesus boot for this. Amanda goes full bay when she's angry at Cal. And this little bit is talking about the power imbalance in relationships. Iris is thinking, this is not infatuation. This is small game hunting at the local coward gun club. We have a woman named George, whose husband is having an affair. She knows the socialists are up on the hill protesting with their children on their shoulders. She caught a whiff of the citrus scent in the air. Fantastic optimism always has a certain pungency. Throngs of Sunny D liberals hoping for an egalitarian utopian future imagined in the prologue of some science fiction book. And Iris is a waitress in a restaurant where all of this main action is taking place. And she has an unpleasant old man who's a customer. And in his head, probably doesn't eat meat, not even because she loves animals. No, because of her thousands of never-ceasing opinions. Listening to a young woman's opinion is like stepping on an anthill. Before you know it, opinions are surging up your leg toward your ballsack, and there's no set of paws big enough in the world to protect you from the insurgents. And skinny waitress is glaring at him now. And it goes on. So Iris and Olive are the two young women that are really at the center of the story. Now we're into Olive Grandmother never trusted old MacDonald and his fast food farm friends. She said he transported sad pigs in dark trucks through the night so rich people did not have to see the disrespected animals. Everyone knows what's wrong in their hearts, Grandmother said. It is their brains that don't know stuff anymore. Grandmother said a lot of things before Olive went into care. Yeah, this writing is outstanding. The story really gets to you. And that's the best of all of these I've told you about. Lots of great books in there. I hope that you are interested in one or more of these. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think. Let me know what you've been reading. Always interested in that. And thank you so very much for watching. Love you all. Bye for now.